a lot of what we're dealing with right now comes directly from a source, a woman called Shimla Firestone. She wrote a book called The Dialectic of Sex in 1972, if I'm not mistaken. And what she did was she basically gave a breakdown that said, but the basic premise of the book is all men are patriarchs and all men want to be oppressors. She was not really talking about Black men, but because a lot of women in the academy were moving into feminist theory at that time, and she was very influential along with Gloria Steinem, that became sort of like received wisdom in the academy, and a lot of women picked up on that, and a lot of people like Michelle Williams and people like Bell Hooks took that and ran with it. And I just want to say that the reason that she said that about Black men is because she never really interviewed any Black men. This came from in the early 1970s when she was watching the Black Panthers, and she was observing the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers at that time were very hyper masculine because, just because of the imagery, the black leather jackets, the black berets, the shotguns. That was a very hyper masculine image because it was pushing back against images of white supremacy that saw Black men as cowards and weak and scared. And because she saw that, she assumed that Black men wanted to be patriarchs as well. That's where that came from, the dialectic of sex. So that's the first part of it. The other part of it is because it ties into the way this country sees Black men. I'll call it the myth of the Black boogeyman, where look, ever since Black men have been on these shores, we've been brutalized, we've been demonized. But I think the demonization has been done more damage than the actual physical abuse that we've suffered, because that allows everyone in this country to see Black men as a gigantic boogeyman. It doesn't care if you're built like Elijah McCain, who was killed by the police, and you're autistic. It doesn't matter if you're as big as George Floyd. It doesn't matter if you're Tamir Rice playing with a toy gun in the park. You're all considered a boogeyman. And anything that feeds into that, people are going to accept, even subconsciously. And I think that's how a lot of these people get hired. And if you come into the academy, or if you come into the media with these preconceived notions, and you're already working in a system in a country that already believes that Black men are the devil anyway, of course you're going to find success.
Very interesting. So you're saying, the fact that the academy has really started to embrace some of these feminist ideologies, right, that paints just a broad stroke over men in general as being patriarchs, and then Black men in particular being boogeyman patriarchs. So that's already a pervading idea. And then I imagine there's a link between, some of these different schools and these major media companies, like through internships, things like that. So I imagine they're getting some of these people straight out of college. And then again, because that stream of thought has come from the academy, from the education, which is overwhelmingly female, it's now seeping over into the media. And then this is why you start to see, it's kind of like they're feeding off of each other, because they're in both places really controlling the conversation. And it sounds like they're not necessarily giving room for other points of view or other vantage points to be expressed.
Exactly. Like I said, if you're already connected to a system, it's really easy to move in that system. Unfortunately, a lot of Black men have been pushed out of the system. They've been pushed out of the academy. They've even been pushed out of a lot of media spaces as well. And that's how come but what's happening now, you're starting to see a lot of backlash against that. Love him or hate him, people like Kevin Samuels and people like Kwame Brown have shown that there is a market out there, and there is a room for Black men with voices who don't necessarily come through the academy, but they have something they have to say that people want to hear. I think that's sort of threatening to a lot of people, because a lot of these people didn't matriculate through that academy, where it feels like everything you say has to be peer reviewed and everything you say has to go through a committee before it's getting heard. And that's also something that's happening in the media as well. To go back to the idea about activist journalism, if you go back and look at what happened, there was an incident that happened during the Freddie Gray protest in Baltimore. There was I think it was Geraldo Rivera came into the hood, and he was trying to create this narrative about what was happening in Baltimore. And this young brother came in and basically confronted Geraldo and said, "What you're saying is not truth. You're here for the riots. You're not here to figure out who we are, and you need to get out." And they basically forced him off the block. That sort of thing was sort of like a watershed moment in journalism, because it showed people that you don't have to go through these gatekeepers and doors to get your message across. And I think that's what's happening now. So I think all that stuff tied together is kind of scaring these people, and they're doubling down on their rhetoric, but it doesn't have some of the same bite like it used to, because you see a lot more pushback from people than you saw maybe like 2 to 3 years ago, when people were afraid to speak. And it's coming from people on the grassroots. A few people in academia, but not a lot. But people on social media, yeah. That's a whole other conversation. But it's starting to happen.
Yeah, and I hope so, because we need balance. We really do need balance. So I think the way that this thing has taken on a life of its own, I think just to promote really extreme, hateful, and dangerous ideology, it's just not good. I don't know how else to put it. It's not good.
I think, and this is the take I have on it. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think feminism, even if you take color out of it, feminism at its core is white women struggle with white men. They're struggling with each other for supremacy and domination. That's the first part of it. Okay. White feminism is basically which is basically, again, ties into feminism in the first place. White feminism is basically concerned about the well-being and the supremacy of white women. What they'll do is they will recruit women from other cultures and other ethnic groups, as long as they go along with the party line that says all men are misogynistic and all men are patriarchs. When they're talking about is white men. Black men have never really been patriarchs, not even in their own houses, not in America. So so first of all, that's incorrect. Even in the history and the data bears that out. Black men tend to be more involved with co-parenting. Black men tend to be more involved in their children's lives, even when they've been incarcerated, even when they're not in the home. So that's first of all, it's a lie, first of all. But as far as like feminism itself and white feminism, they are more than happy to recruit Black women to be their foot soldiers and be their shields to go and attack Black men and say that because all men are patriarchs, you're a man, you're a Black, so therefore you're a patriarch. So of course they're fine with that. But if you notice, anytime any Black woman moves against that rhetoric or goes against that agenda, they automatically get cut off. And all that sisterhood goes out the window when they start attacking those same Black women.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I remember, during my interview with Dr. T. Johnson, he really started to break this down and how he was seeing this play out literally right in front of him and in college, in the academy. So, and you're right. I mean, as far as the way this struggle, because like anybody who has even a basic understanding of American history at the very least, at what point did Black men have even the institution of power to oppress, to be patriarchs? Like, tell me a time in history where that was the case. Tell me a time in history where they were not the most victimized, the most imprisoned, the most disenfranchised. Please tell me a time. Then maybe we can talk about how they've been the misters, right?
Exactly.
They've all been misters.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's always been misters in the community. There's always been toxic, violent men, Black men in the community, but they'll have been the exception and not the rule. You know what I mean? And right. A lot of times, not to say that it didn't happen. I mean, obviously we know and we've seen the numbers, but that's absolutely a very small number compared to the rest of the Black men out here. And I think because negative is so powerful, people run with those negative narratives because the people who are actually doing positive things and going about their lives are quiet. And I think that's part of it as well.